growing up as a Latina in a Latin household, I mean, the messages that I received and so many other Latina women I know have received is that sex is a sin. If you have sex before marriage, like men are not going to respect you. Si te dejas tocar, te vas a embarazar. Like, she just hung out with my grandma and she would tell all her daughters, my tias, like, no te dejes agarrar de los hombres porque te vas a quedar panzona. Like, that was the message, right? Like, which means like, don't let a guy touch you or else like you're gonna get a belly, right? You're gonna get pregnant. So it's like fear that like is pumped into us, right? Because I also think there's this pressure to like, succeed, right? Like tienes que sobresalir. So in order for you to succeed, you have to not get pregnant. In order for you to not get pregnant, don't have sex, right? But there's never that education piece. There's just don't do it. Don't be touched by a man. Don't look at a man. You're gonna get pregnant, and then once you get pregnant, you're worthless. And that's just like it, right?
Welcome to the Chingona Revolution podcast, where we will bring out your inner badass Latina, overcome self-doubt, help you gain clarity, and pave your own path, all while leading with courage. I am your host, Latina coach and speaker, Erica Cruz. Hello. Welcome back to this week's episode of Chingona Revolution. This is your host, Erica Cruz. And for today's episode, I am interviewing a dear friend of mine. And this is a good podcast episode. It's very in line with Chingona Revolution because we are talking about a taboo topic of sex. And this guest is none other than my friend, Jocelyn Silva, who is a life and intimacy coach. She has over 13 years of experience helping people break free from limiting beliefs and fully embracing their sexual power. Once a Catholic schoolgirl who dreamt of becoming a nun, yes, that's a true story, and you'll hear a little bit about it in the interview. Now she teaches clients how to embody confidence, connection, and pleasure without guilt or shame. Jocelyn has a master's in social work and has a background in sex education, and she blends psychology, embodiment, and radical self-love in her coaching services. She's the creator of Pleasure Playground, which is a transformative group coaching program, and a passionate digital nomad. True story. I met her in Mexico City and now she is living somewhere else in Mexico. And she believes that sexual empowerment makes life easier and way more fun. When she's not coaching, you can find her dancing salsa. You will not believe that whenever Jocelyn and I met, I didn't dance salsa yet. So we decided right after this interview, I have to go to Mexico so that we can go dance salsa together. Whenever she's not coaching, she's dancing salsa or exploring new countries or indulging in baklava. So you can follow her at I am Jocelyn Silva for more pleasure, positive wisdom. And we've linked all of that down below. Let's get into the interview. Jocelyn Silva, I feel like this is a long time coming. Welcome to Chingona Revolution.
Hello, thank you for having me. And yes, I agree. It is a long time coming. So happy to be here.
We've been in each other's worlds for a little while. And as you know, I'm a huge fan of your work. And I feel like it takes a lot of courage to be a sex coach. So can you tell us, first tell us what you do and who you are.
Yeah, amazing. So my name is Jocelyn. I am a sexual empowerment coach and sex educator and digital nomad. And I support individuals with breaking through mental and emotional blocks that get in the way of them embracing their full expression of sexuality and get to a place where they feel really amazing with their sex and intimate lives. In a nutshell, that's what I do.
Love it. And how did this come about? Because, I mean, you didn't always do this. So tell us the story of how you became a sex coach and how did you tell your parents what you were doing?
Oh, yes. Okay. So let me give you the full scoop. Okay. So I was raised in a very Catholic home. My mom is from El Salvador. My dad's from Mexico. So I'm first generation Latina, born and raised in Los Angeles. And growing up, I was very Catholic. I was an altar server. I was a lector. I went to Catholic school. I got a scholarship in 8th grade for being most involved in my parish. I was in the Via Crucis every year. Like I was in Christian leadership in high school. It was like I was very, very religious. And when I was a teenager, I've always been like a very horny person. Like I've just been like, I've always had a very high sex drive. So when I started developing in my teen years, I had a really big internal conflict with like what the church was telling me about sex and like what I wanted to do with myself, right? And I remember when I was 16 years old, I had a boyfriend, which was really bizarre. I wanted to be a nun at that time. He wanted to be a priest. But like we were teenagers, so of course we were doing like sexy things. And it got to a point where I was going to confession once a week because I was so scared of going to hell. Like my shame around my sexuality became very, very strong. And a priest actually had to tell me, like, you're good with coming once a year. You don't have to come once a week. And I was like, oh man, okay, my bad, whatever, right? But that led to like a lot of depression because I started just feeling like God isn't going to love me because of who I am or what I do or what I like or what I'm curious about, even though everything I was experiencing were just natural, like developmental phases that teenagers go through. So I graduated high school, went into college, and that's when I fully immersed myself in. I joined the feminist club, the Queer Alliance. I took psychology classes, human sexuality classes, and I really started questioning my faith. And that's when I was like, oh my God, like sex is actually really amazing and interesting. I had sex for the first time. It was a beautiful experience. And I said, I cannot believe I've been lied to my whole life. I felt very, very like betrayed by the church and my family and all the things. So when I was 20 years old, my friend invited me to be a sex educator with a collective called Coochie Los Angeles. I fell in love with it. And I said, this is what I want to do. I want to be a sex therapist. So I got my bachelor's degree in gender and women's studies. I managed a sex shop for 4 years. I fell in love with it. I got my master's degree in social work with every intention to be a sex therapist. But then when through a series of all these crazy things that happened in my life, I went through a divorce. My mom almost died. Um, I finally I was reflecting on what I wanted to do with my life. And I came across this coach that I hired, a life coach, because I was feeling really lost at that time. This time it was like 2019. And she said, I know you want to be a sex therapist, but have you ever heard of coaching? And I said, well, you're a coach, but like, I don't know much about coaching. And she actually supported me in learning how to coach. And I fell in love with coaching. So I've been a sex coach now for 5 years. I've been a sex educator for 15 now. And yeah, in a nutshell, that's how I got here.
Wow. And I've heard bits and pieces of this, but I love the journey that you just described. And one of the things that I wrote down was I think you've always been spiritually connected, right? And the way that you knew how to connect spiritually was through religion when you were younger. But
Mhm.
I am curious, how is sex something that is spiritual as well? And how can you connect to your spirituality through sexuality, whether it's with yourself or with somebody else?
Oh, I love that question. So I do not believe that religion and spirituality are the same thing. Religion is, how do I say this? Religion is a tool that people use to gain spiritual connection with a being higher than themselves, right? So they use, Catholicism or Buddhism or whatever, some people don't think Buddhism is a religion, but you know what I mean? Like some sort of spiritual practice to connect with the higher power. And so for me, I fully believe that our creator, right, our higher power, the universe, whatever you want to call it, gave me my sexual desires, gave me my sexual expression. So actually, let me explain to you how I actually decided to be a sex coach because it's actually very spiritually intertwined. So yeah, I believe that our higher power, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, has given me my sexual desire, has given me my sexual expression. And so for me, for a person to be fully expressed in their sexuality is like one of the things that came to me randomly, and I'll bring this back. Like I was randomly like thinking this, and I was like, this really, I think for me, um, in a nutshell, explains how I feel about my connection to sexuality and how I feel that God has given me my sexual expression. And it's pleasure is our body's way of saying, I love you. And I truly feel that sexual pleasure is God's way of saying, I love you. Like, this is your body. And this is like the pleasure the euphoria that you get to experience from something that is naturally yours, right?
I think you
So
need
it's
to
interesting.
make that your tagline and put that on shirts. I
Yeah.
love that so much. Or make stickers with it or something.
Thank you. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, and I remember when it came to, I was like, God, that's a really beautiful concept. Coming from going to freaking confession once a week to like now believing that my sexual expression is such a beautiful gift, right? So it's interesting actually. When I started my business, my mom was in a coma, and my mom is a huge inspiration for why I decided to be a sex coach. Not because she's been the most sexually empowering mother, but actually because she's a big reason why I've experienced so much sexual shame. But the reason why she was so overprotective with me around sexuality is because of her traumas, right? And what she went through. And I look at her and I think to myself, man, I wish my mom had access to coaching and education at her age so that she could have healed through all of that and not have had so much sexual, um, for lack of a better word, hangups, sexual trauma, sexual, uh, like blocks that didn't allow her to be fully expressed, right? So when she was in the coma, I made a deal with God and I said, if you give me my mother back, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I went to an astrologist and they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a sex coach. And like, great, that's what you have to do. And I'm not kidding, Erica. The moment I decided to be that, everything just like fell into place. And so I truly believe that the work I do is not just a job. This is my vocation. And I'm very passionate about supporting, especially Latina women, in healing their sexual shame and blocks to get to a place where they feel fully expressed. And it's fully connected to our spirituality, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything that was just stated. So, one of the questions that I had for you, which you touched on now, so we'll just jump to that, was around why is it that women, specifically Latinas, experience so much shame around
Mhm.
sexuality?
Mhm. I think it's really funny because a lot of individuals have this idea that Latina women are like sexy and sexually open and like yeah, like fully sexually expressed. And I think it's hilarious when people tell me that because I'm like, I grew up Latina, and let me tell you, that is not the case. Like, um, because we see people like Shakira or like Jennifer Lopez, right? And they think like, oh yeah, Latina women are so sexually open, but
Or Wonder
actually
Woman,
growing,
right? The Wonder
yeah,
Woman in the news, the Spanish channel. It's like they always have like the nicest butts and they're wearing like the form-fitting dresses. Yeah, I think it's just the media portrayal. So, sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, no, totally. It's a media portrayal, but like growing up as a Latina in a Latin household, I mean, the messages that I received and so many other Latina women I know have received is that sex is a sin. If you have sex before marriage, like men are not going to respect you. Si te dejas tocar, te vas a embarazar. Like, she just hung out with my grandma and she would tell all her daughters, my tías, like, no te dejes agarrar de los hombres porque te vas a quedar panzona. Like that was the message, right? Like, which means like, don't let a guy touch you or else like you're gonna get a belly, right? You're gonna get pregnant. So it's like fear, 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 fear that like is pumped into us, right? Because I also think there's this pressure to like, you know, succeed, right? Like tienes que sobresalir. So in order for you to succeed, you have to not get pregnant. In order for you to not get pregnant, don't have sex, right? But there's never that education piece. There's just don't do it. Don't be touched by a man. Don't look at a man. You're gonna get pregnant, and then once you get pregnant, you're worthless. And that's just like it, right? Um, so I definitely think the messaging from the culture, the messaging from religion, right? Since Catholicism is so heavy in Latin America, and I think it's also the pressure that we feel to be something, be someone in the world that our mothers definitely mean well, right? Um, but obviously it has its consequences. I do think it's also just like a very layered issue because then you have this other layer of like intergenerational trauma, which I think is like a really important piece to also acknowledge. Like I know that's true in my family, right? Like for example, my grandmother on my mom's side had 9 kids with like 5 different men. So my mom growing up witnessing that, she's like, I don't want to be that way. Yo no quiero ser así. Yo quiero tener una familia con un hombre, right? And so she like was very, very, very like, I just want to be with one man. I want to have one family because I don't want to be like my mom, right? So that also then then she like poured that onto me and in the form of don't have sex, don't do it, it's bad. Right. And then like now I'm left with like having to heal all of that. So it's definitely a very layered issue, but I think that those are, some of the things that I think Latin women in particular deal with.
Yeah, one of the points that you mentioned that I hadn't thought about was the pressure to succeed. I think that's so
Mm.
important because our family has constantly been in survival. And if they want us to get ahead, they don't want us to get pregnant. And then, I mean, I don't know about you, but like at first when I was younger, my parents, my mom, was like, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant. And now that I'm in my 30s, she's like, are you ever going to have kids? Like, it has totally flipped now.
That's funny.
Oh
She's like,
man.
you can get pregnant now. I'd like
Yeah.
for you to get pregnant now.
She's like, before I get too old, she's like, I want to be able to like, enjoy my grandchildren. Anyway, so
That's funny.
tell me about because you work with Latinas, but you've also told me that you work with men as well.
Hmm.
So, what is one thing that I actually wrote this one down? This is one of the questions that I wrote down. What do you wish more women knew about men whenever it comes to pleasure and sex?
That's a great question. Okay, so by the way, I started my career only working with women. And then I started working with couples. And then I started working with men. And let me tell you, working with couples and men has been such a game changer for my understanding of sexuality. And it's something that I'm still trying to learn myself in my personal and professional life, right? So, something that I wish that women knew about men is that, or I think that everyone understands about the gender dynamics in heterosexual relationships is that, and this is something that I've seen as a pattern in my coaching clients, is that women are raised to be sexless, emotional beings. Men are raised to be sexual, emotionless beings. So, a lot of times when men and women come together, women need a strong emotional connection to be able to have healthy sexual relationships, and men need sex in order to be able to open up emotionally. And a lot of men have a really hard time putting their feelings into words because they were never taught to experience their feelings, right? So suddenly things happen to your body and you're like, I don't know what's going on. And then we look at these men like, what's wrong with you, right? Men look at women like, what's wrong with you, right? And then there's a really hard time that people have understanding their partners. And so I think that understanding this one phenomenon can really support individuals in like knowing how to navigate relationships, knowing that like men understanding that women need that emotional connection and doing the work to try to understand their own emotions. And then women understanding and having more patience with men in their inability to really be emotionally able to like express themselves, to have the ability to express themselves emotionally, which, like I said, is also something that I'm learning in my personal life. And I think is one of the most challenging things about heterosexual relationships is how we're conditioned, right, in our gender.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, especially if you come from our culture, right? Do you have any brothers? You do. You have brothers.
I do. I have two older brothers.
Yeah, I have an older brother as well, and I think our experience as women in our family dynamics were probably way different than that of our brothers. So, do you find that a lot of women that you work with are disconnected from their bodies?
Yes, 100%. I would say so for sure.
And how do you think that they can start to reconnect with, or like how would somebody know that they're disconnected from their bodies? Because I don't think people even know that that's a thing until they work with somebody
Hmm.
like you. So what are some signs that women are disconnected from their bodies, and what can they do to start rebuilding trust with their bodies?
Hmm. So I would say that the biggest thing to know when you're disconnected from your body is when you say things like, I don't know what I like sexually. My boyfriend asks me what I like, and I have no idea what to say. I don't know how to answer that question. It stresses me out when my partner asks me what I want in bed. If you are feeling that way, it's because there's a disconnect, right? So what that means is that if you don't take the time to truly like pause and be like, what do I enjoy on a sexual level? Right. And even taking it a step back, right, is like, do you understand how your body works? Let's just start with there,
Mm.
right? Do you understand what your vulva is? Do you understand what your vagina is? Do you understand where your clitoris is? Do you understand erogenous zones? Do you understand arousal, right? Do you feel comfortable experiencing arousal? Or does arousal make you feel embarrassed and shameful, right? So taking a step back and like understanding all those things first, and then taking it a step further to paying attention. Oh, I really like it when my partner touches me in this particular way. I
Mhm.
really like it when my partner does this thing with me. I really like doing this thing to my partner or with my partner, right? Then you start to feel more connected because you're allowing yourself the ability to like ease into that experience of pleasure, right?
Mhm.
Because when it comes to sexual empowerment, I like to break it down to two different things: knowledge and courage. When I say knowledge, I mean like sexual anatomy, knowledge of self, knowledge of partner, obtaining information around about yourself, like gathering data about your own sexual expression,
Yeah.
and then courage, having the courage to act upon those sexual things, right? So yeah, if you find yourself saying, I don't know what I like, it stresses me out when my partner asks me that, whatever they do is fine, there's definitely a disconnect and there's opportunity for you to learn and gain knowledge so that then you can have the courage to relax, ease into it, and enjoy whatever you're experiencing.
Yeah. Would you also say that the courage part is having the courage to ask for what you need or having the difficult conversations of like, I feel disconnected here? And is that something that you coach people on? Because I think what our culture has also trained us to do is to keep our thoughts and stories to ourselves and not communicate, especially when the topic is so taboo, like something like sex.
Yeah, 100%. Asking for what it is that you want sexually is incredibly important, right? And feeling safe enough with your partner that they will actually, one, like hold whatever it is that you desire safe, right?
Mhm.
And two, that they have the desire to fulfill your needs, right? Like that's important as well.
Yeah. So have you ever
Mhm.
had a client who struggled with like, oh, I know I want these things, but I'm embarrassed to ask? And how do you coach them through asking? How, like, what steps would you give them or what advice would you give them so that they can ask?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So I forgot how they said this, but I did a podcast interview several years ago with Curious Fox, this like organization that does like sexy, media content. And I remember the way that the podcast host said it was, we are not used to the taste of the language of sex in our mouths, right? So for a lot of us, saying words like my clitoris, my vulva, my vagina, my breasts, my butt is really, really like scary because we don't actually ever verbally say those things. We have them in our head and we think about them when we're having sex, but we don't actually say them, right? So when I'm working with my clients, whenever they say, oh, I'm really embarrassed, oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying this, or oh, this is really shameful, or oh, like it's hard for me to say that. The first thing is I have them say it to me, right? So we practice it in coaching. So I have this workbook that I created that's called Knowing Me, Knowing You, and it literally takes you from it takes you from A to Z on like a full sexual experience. And it starts with time of day and setting all the way to aftercare. And I actually have prompts where I have my clients say, when it comes to foreplay, I really enjoy when you dot dot dot. And then actually have my clients say it out loud. During foreplay, I really enjoy when you go down on me. During foreplay, I really enjoy hot, passionate makeout session and kisses on my neck, right? Because when they practice it with me and they're able to actually say it to me, they've already said it, right? So now they got that practice in. And sometimes I even have them say it like 3 to 10 times just to get them used to it. And that's the cool thing about having a coach is that you can practice with your coach before you go and communicate that with your partner, right? So when someone experiences that, we practice it together. We go through a full sexual experience. I actually have them say the whole thing as if I was their partner. And then that supports them in really being able to get used to speaking about those things and then get comfortable ultimately with their partners. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's very aligned with how I support my clients who are, as you know, inside of Courage Driven Latina, sometimes people are like starting coaching businesses. And a big thing that they struggle with is I'm having a hard time introducing myself as a coach. So I literally have them
Mm-hmm.
write it out and say it to me, say it to the group, say it in the mirror, say it in the car, and just practice it over and over. Because I think you're so right with what you mentioned. Even though we know the words, we're not used to saying them. So, would you recommend that people have this conversation with their partners? Because I am a firm believer that everybody should be having conversations with their partners, even if things are great, right? Like they should know that you enjoy what it is that they are doing, or that you prefer that they don't do something if you don't want them to do that. Yeah, when is the best time to have this conversation? Would it be when they are in bed getting ready for these things, like in the moment, or is it better to have a separate conversation, not in the bedroom?
Mm-hmm. You know what? It depends because every single person is different, right? I'll give you an example in my personal life. I can talk about sex all day, every day. It does not matter. Like before sex, after sex, you want to give me feedback, tell me that something's wrong. Cool, let's do it. I don't care, right? My partner does not like talking about sex after sex. Like that's not the time that he wants to hear feedback, right? So, what I would say is that there needs to be preliminary conversations. And the preliminary conversations need to sound like this like, hey, if I have feedback for you sexually, when is the best time for me to have that conversation with you? Hey, if I would like to express a sexual need, when is the best time for me to bring that up to you? Hey, if I need something in our relationship in general, right, sexually or non sexually, when is the best time for me to bring that up? Another question you can ask is, how would you like me to bring this up? What is the type of communication that you will be most receptive to? Right? Some people really like direct, like, hey, I would really love it if you stopped doing this. Cool, you got it. And some people need more feelings, like, hey, like I'm feeling a little disconnected. I would really appreciate if you did this instead of that, right? Like a little softer. So, having preliminary conversations with your partner, how do you like to be communicated to? When do you want to be communicated to? How would you prefer these conversations to look like? And then understand and navigate that before you bring them up is a really, really, I'm realizing, very, very, very important to do so that you don't run into unnecessary communication mishaps.
Amazing advice. What role does mindfulness or just kind of being in the present moment play whenever it comes to intimacy and sexuality? Because we hear women, we hear that women have like their to-do list and their mind is somewhere else. So, what can you share with us about either a formal mindfulness practice, or how can we be more mindful, and why is it important for us to be mindful to fully experience pleasure?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, mindfulness is everything. I would say it's absolutely everything, right? Like, okay, so again, those preliminary questions, right? So when I go through knowing me, knowing you with my clients, the first few questions is what's your favorite environment to have intimacy in, and what time of day do you like to have intimacy in, right? And in those questions, like I'm realizing how important it is for people to like pause and to ask themselves, like, okay, when is best for me? It's really fascinating because sometimes my clients will say morning time, afternoon, evening, right? But most of the time, what I hear my clients say is when my kids are all asleep or my kids are taken care of, when my to do list is done and ready, when the room is clean, right? So it's not a specific setting or like time of day. It's more just like there are these things that need to happen in order for my brain to be clear so that I can fully relax and enjoy the sexual experience because there's so many different responsibilities, right, in everyone's lives and people that have so many things weighing on them that like it's not sexy to think about like, oh my God, are the kids have the kids eaten? You know, like what time is it? Like I need to put the laundry in, like I have something to do for work, right? So mindfulness is everything. So what I would say though, because even I think the word mindfulness can, a lot of people don't fully understand that. So, and to make it as easy as possible, what I would say is ask yourself the question, what makes you feel most relaxed, right? When do you feel most relaxed and receptive to sex, right? So what supports you in feeling calm, right? Is it when your to-do list is done? Is it when the kids are asleep? Is it when you're done with work? Is it on the weekends? Is it in the mornings? Is it in the evenings, right? And then asking yourself that question can really support you in being more present, right? I would also say that if you're noticing that you have a million things on your mind and your partner's trying to initiate intimacy with you, invite them into your internal landscape. Let them know, like, hey, I have a lot of things on my mind right now, right? I have X, Y, and Z on my mind. Talk about it, process through it, right? Maybe have your partner help you with it, right? And that could be really supportive. Like, I'll give you a good example. So I have this couple client right now, and it's really interesting because the wife often complains about all the things that she has to do in the home, but she never asks her husband for help. So we came up with this little routine where after dinner, they will drink a tea to hang out and hang out with their daughters because that's like their routine. They have tea after dinner. And then he is going to help her put the dishes away. And they've been doing this now for the past 3 weeks. And she's like, oh my God, it's been such a game changer. She's like, we hang out, he helps me out, and then like I'm not stressed out. And the entire time, the simple answer was asking him for help. And he just was like, I'm super down to help you. Like, if that means you'll sit and have tea with me and hang out, like, sure, I'll help you put the dishes away. It's not a big deal, right? So I think inviting your partner into that space is important too, to support you in being more mindful and being more present and more relaxed.
This is fascinating because what I'm hearing you say with that story is that a lot of the like sexual issues people have don't even have anything to do with sex.
Oh no.
It's
I always
literally
joke around that like I reel people in with sex coaching and I'm like, just kidding. We're going to talk about literally everything else because very little sex problems have to do with sex itself.
that's
Very few.
fascinating. But it's
Hmm.
a place in which it magnifies when something's out of balance.
Hmm.
The bedroom.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Hmm.
This is informative for me as well. So I'm going to switch gears because I think people used to confuse us on TikTok. People thought, who are I and I with you? Do you remember this?
Well, okay. I was actually going to say it was funny because when I was telling my partner about me being on this podcast interview, I still remember when I heard about you because I was on TikTok and I got a random message and this person was like, Jocelyn, you have a twin, like you have a double. And I was like, what? And she sent me a video of yours. And I was like, who is she? She's like, oh my gosh, she's also a Latina coach. And I was like, oh crap, that's so funny.
Yeah. And then I was at a conference once and somebody said hi to me like they knew me, and I never knew like who they thought I was. And I think they thought I was you, and it was in
Oh
LA,
my
and it
God.
would actually make a lot of sense. But yeah, and then people will be like, "Do I know you?" And I get that a lot. But anyway, I feel like it is the biggest compliment ever because as soon as I saw your face, I
Likewise.
was like, "Oh, I'm so aligned with her." And especially because, and I've told you this privately whenever we first met up in Mexico City, but I was very disconnected from my own sexuality growing up. Like I was so one of my mentors was like, you're literally like a Mexican man. Like you don't want to show emotion, you don't let yourself cry, you're just like, I was very much in my masculine, and I don't think I had my first orgasm until I was 27, which is wild.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that, I mean, there's so much data on women like never actually having had an orgasm. So like we don't know what we don't know. And I really do think that the work that you're doing is life changing because when you connect to your sexuality and sensuality, it's life changing. Like it spills over to every other area of your life. I totally went on a tangent right now. This was not what I was going to talk about. So let me just ask you one question here and then we'll go back to TikTok because I had a question about TikTok. So
Mhm.
um, what have you, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person that you know that's been in a situation like this where like they were so disconnected from their sexuality. And I actually think it's no accident that the moment I connected to like self pleasure and that I started reading books about like my body, and I started understanding like, the book Come As You Are and like all these other books that were really helpful in me understanding my sexuality and things that I didn't learn in school. And that happened to coincide with me launching my business and me creating content and me being able to
Mm.
express myself creatively. So what have you seen connecting, whenever people connect or whenever women connect to their sexuality, like what does that unlock for them in their lives?
Okay. So, in order to answer that question, I think it's really important to understand what sexuality is, right? So, the reason why I'm such a sex geek is because I truly believe that anyone that owns their sexual expression becomes an unstoppable, powerful force because sex is the most vulnerable thing that we engage in as humans on all levels, right? Emotionally, mentally, and of course physically. You're naked in front of someone, you see you in compromising positions, like it's a deeply, deeply vulnerable experience,
Yeah.
right? So when you can meet yourself at a deeply vulnerable place and own it and be okay with it and be comfortable with it and really relax into it, that creates power. That creates empowerment, right?
Mhm.
Because you're pretty much saying, this is the most vulnerable part of me and I accept it and I own it and I'm proud of it, right? So when you think, okay, sexuality is the most vulnerable thing we engage in order for me to feel like an empowered person, right? I get to own and accept my sexuality. Like that unlocks so much already, right? Because what situation aside from sex is going to give you the same amount of vulnerability? Nothing is. Nothing, right? Because it's the most vulnerable thing. So, yeah, I think that when you understand that about sex, you heal, you get to a place of acceptance, radical acceptance, then the sky's the limit for you on all levels.
Ooh, I love the word radical acceptance. What would you describe that as for people who maybe aren't in this line of work?
hmm Well, radical acceptance for me is understanding who you are and what you desire and owning it
Like
and
accepting
owning it
yourself.
completely. Like accepting
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah, and owning it. So, I'll give you an example. A lot of the clients that come to me and you know what, I'm going to speak about myself because I think that a lot of my personal experiences have really supported me in like being so compassionate towards my clients, but
That's why you're such a
for
good
a really long thank
right?
you.
Because
Yeah,
you've
thank
gone
you.
through it. Yeah. It's what makes a good coach. Yeah. And people sometimes are like, oh, wait, but I'm not perfect. It's like, no, that's exactly why you're such a good coach because you've been through it. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mhm.
my sexual empowerment journey has taken so many twists and turns. I gave you like nutshell version, but there's a lot, right? And for a very long time, my biggest issue in romantic relationships was my inability to be 100% honest with my partners because of my fear of abandonment, right? So I would mold myself, to whatever it is that I thought that they wanted me to be, right? Or like let go of the things that were important to me to keep them around, right? And that was not radical acceptance. And I had to learn the hard way, right? I would lose myself in relationships. And to this day, it's still something that I struggle with, right? And so finally, like I got into a 12-step program for sex and love addiction that was like hands down, I don't care. Even if you don't think you have an addiction, everyone should do a 12-step program at some point in their lives because it completely changed my life. And it was one of the most beautiful things I ever experienced. And in that program, I really learned that radical acceptance is being who you are, being 100% authentic, accepting who you are, being proud of who you are without the fear that someone will abandon you because of it. And that's what it is for me, right? Is saying like, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And that shit is fucking scary, especially when it comes to romantic and sexual relationships.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
think Gabor Mate said it so beautifully. Oftentimes, attachment makes us forego authenticity. We forego authenticity for the sake of attachment.
Wow. This is actually so
You know?
alignment because last week's episode was all about non-attachment and how like attachment
Mm,
is like the cause of our suffering. But the way I talked, it was like a solo episode, but the way I talked about it is like attachment is us trying to control like other people or situations or outcomes, which we never have control, right? So it's literally like a self-fulfilling prophecy of suffering, and through non-attachment is when we can actually find fulfillment and release ourselves of suffering. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. You're the like third person I've heard talk about a 12-step program for sex and love addiction. I also heard
Mhm.
Elizabeth Gilbert talk about it, who's the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and she also wrote Big Magic.
Mm.
I don't remember what podcast I heard her on, but it like as she talked about it, she started describing sex and love addiction, and I was like, I should look into this. Like it was very interesting the way that she described it, because it sounds wild, but you'd be surprised how many of us carry those traits. So I'm glad you said that.
I always joke around that like sex and love addiction, like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, right? Like it has like this weird name, but I'm like, they literally should just rename it to How to Love Yourself Anonymous, because that's literally what it is.
Wow. Instead
Like
of looking
how
for
to
the
love yourself
no.
101.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Oh my gosh, I love
Mhm.
our conversation. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to talk about was TikTok, but that's like what I had brought up. And this is more coming at it from like a content creator perspective and a coach and different things like that. So you grew your TikTok account to what, like 800,000?
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Ah, I'm gonna cry. I'm like still grieving it.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, yeah. So I put my heart and soul into TikTok for 4 years, and my TikTok grew astronomically during the pandemic to 800,000.
Mhm.
And last year, it's so funny. I'm not usually very susceptible to hackers and scams. I'm pretty good at that. But last year, I got like an email that just seemed completely legitimate, because TikTok used to send me emails all the time.
Right.
And I got an email that said that they wanted to verify my account. And I was like, oh, for sure.
Which would make sense.
Gave my information.
You've been featured on
Yeah,
things, your
yeah,
account grew. Like, yeah, it all checks out.
it all checks out. I was like, oh, for sure. So I gave my information. And as soon as I gave my information, my partner was like, wait, check the email. Like, how do you know this is real? And I looked. And as soon as he said that, I saw at Gmail. I was like, fuck, this is a fucking hacker. Hacked my into my account. They held my account for ransom. I wouldn't pay them. And they wiped out my entire account and sold it to a random hookah company in Turkey. So all the 700,000 people that follow me on TikTok are now following this random hookah company in Turkey that stole my account. And I
Oh,
don't have TikTok anymore.
I'm so sorry. And I didn't ask this to like make you feel bad or like shame you in any way. The reason I'm actually asking this question is because from my perspective, it looks like your business and you are still thriving.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I would even argue like maybe even more than last year.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I agree.
And
Well, it's so funny because, I'm not gonna lie, girl, like the year before my TikTok got hacked, I had such a love-hate relationship with TikTok. And I think that that's what social media does to you. I think like, well, I'll speak for myself.
yeah.
It made me crazy for like a while, right? Because I mean, could you imagine? I was like going viral, 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 viral. And then suddenly it like died down. And that really messed with like my self esteem. It messed with my psyche. I was, you make it about yourself. Like, what's wrong with me? People hate me. Why aren't I going viral anymore? It's like, and it's a
Totally.
numbers game. It's an algorithm. It has nothing to do with you. But of course, you take it personal.
Yeah.
And so when it happened, I really felt like there was like almost this blessing in disguise where I was like, honestly, when it happened, I'm like, thank God, get me away from TikTok. Like I don't want to be here. But now a year later, I'm thinking back and I'm like, man, that's a bummer. I really did put a lot of time and effort into that. I do miss the community that I built there, but of course, I built it once. I could build it again if I wanted to. But yeah, no, I don't. I mean, even at that time though, like 99% of my clientele does not come from social media.
Yeah, I
So
remember. I
yeah.
remember when we met in person in Mexico City, and you were telling me, which I found fascinating. But and the reason that I bring that up is because again, with or without that, you are thriving. Like I think you are like just energetically, I can feel your energy is in such a light and vibrant place right now. And I just like have to give you your flowers because I think a lot of people that I coach, they're like, oh, I just want to like grow. I just want to do this. And they're so hyper fixated on it. But here's Jocelyn who grew her account to 800,000, lost it, and is still here and still kicking ass. And I think
Mm.
that as much as social media is beautiful because it connects us with so many people and different things like that, it's also not necessary. It's
It's not
not the
necessary.
only thing that's going to help you grow your business. And especially because I can relate. I was on TikTok whenever my stuff was going viral. Now I hardly even post on it. Because when I do, I get like 200 views. And it's like, I should post just to post, right? Not because of the views, but I totally know what you mean, where like we fell into this trap of, oh, virality meant worthiness. And then we were like constantly seeking the viral. But whenever the platform shifted and now like people are getting such low views, it's hard to initiate creation from that place.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah.
Almost impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I want to speak to this because I'm sure you have women that are coaches that are listening in as well. And I just
Yep.
want to like give the best advice that I can give
Please do.
to anybody who wants to be an online coach. So think of it like this. This is the biggest thing that really, really helped me out. TikTok, I will always be grateful for TikTok because that's what gave me my beginnings. That's what gave me my very first clients. Okay. But in order to grow an online coaching business, at least, I'll speak for myself and my experience, is that it's important that you ask yourself the question, where are my clients hanging out? Right? Like, where are they? So, for example, I really enjoy working with, 25 to 60-year-old individuals, um, singles, couples, people that are pretty successful in their life. And there's this one piece, the sexuality piece that they really want to work on. Right. So I thought to myself, where are my clients hanging out? And to be honest, my clients are not hanging out on TikTok. My ideal client is not spending hours scrolling on TikTok. Right. And so what was helpful for me is understanding, okay, if I was a successful individual that was seeking support with their sex lives, what would they do? They'd go to Google. They'd go to Yelp, right? So I have a Google page and a Yelp page, and I started asking my clients to write me reviews, right? Well, what happens is that when SEO, search engine optimization, starts to notice that a lot of people from different places are seeking out your page, it creates credibility, and then you start to rank. So if you go, for example, on Google and you click in Sex Coach Los Angeles, I'm the first one that pops up because I've been up there for 5 years now, and several of my clients have posted reviews. And if you go on Yelp, I'm also the first one that pops up in LA, right? So if you're a coach that wants to do an online business, I would say focus on search engine optimization. When people go on Google, ask yourself, how can they find me? Starting a Google page, creating a website, and then optimizing a blog, right? So that when people start to like Google things that are in your niche, you'll also pop up. But like social media is 100% not the only way. I would probably say that it's the most soul crushing way, and definitely lean more into SEO.
And one of the things that I want to point out about um what you just mentioned, because like I can already think of a bunch of clients of mine. Like I have one girl
Mm-hmm.
who's an esthetician and does skincare, and that was the first thing I
Mm-hmm.
told her. I was like, let's start with that. Everybody that you've worked with, have your friends like do this. Everybody in the group help her with this. And one of the things she did was like the hydrofacial. So we like added keywords in there, different things like that. But what I like about what you just shared is like you're currently a nomad, right? So you're not in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
even though that is home base for you, and you're still able to do that even then. So I think that's great advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's really supportive. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to share with us?
Let me go back to the question you did ask me about the trends. I'm having a hard time thinking about my clients because all my clients are so different. But I will say that there's been something that's been heavy on my mind that I've been reflecting on that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's something that gets often, and I touched upon this very, briefly, but something that gets touched upon, something that doesn't get touched upon a lot, or someone that doesn't get talked about a lot, and as it regards to, sexuality and intimacy, is like that piece about radical acceptance and that piece about like just being 100% yourself fully. I think that especially for women. I just read this book called Why Men Love Bitches, which like it's like such an interesting book because I'm like a lot of what it says, I'm like, this is not stuff that I agree with. But what I thought was interesting about the book is that it reflected a lot about the experiences that I've had in my life and a lot of women I know have had in my life. And this idea that like I will change who I am in order to keep someone around, right? Or again, like Gabor Maté said,
Mhm.
foregoing authenticity for the sake of attachment, right?
Right.
And I just want to say that like if someone is having a hard time with it, just like being yourself 100%, being authentically you and understanding who you are and loving that, appreciating that, and really accepting that can do wonders for your sex life, right? Because then you're not trying to pretend to be someone that you're not, you're being yourself fully. And also, wouldn't you want someone to love you for who you actually are and not who you're pretending to be, right? So
Right.
I think one of the most beautiful things that you can do for your sexual expression is learn about who you are and then accept who you are and like express who you are unapologetically. And that's one of the most beautiful things. It sounds corny as hell, but it's so fucking true.
It is because it's hard, right? Like I was, as you were talking, I was thinking that's the biggest advice we give kids. Like just be yourself. They don't even know who they are yet. Like
Yeah.
once you get to our age, you start to figure out who you are. Once you had some life experience, once you were somebody else for long enough, then you realize that that's not who you are. And the authenticity part is difficult and it requires that radical acceptance. Um,
Yeah.
Before I just ask you a few like rapid fire final questions, I'm curious, where can people connect with you? How can they work with you?
Mhm.
Where like should they go to Instagram, your website, Yelp, Google? Tell us all the 411.
Yes, all of it, all of it. So my website is www.jocelynsilva.com. You can also find me on Instagram and YouTube at I am Jocelyn Silva, and you can go on Google and Yelp as well. You can just look up Jocelyn Silva sex coaching, and then I'll pop up.
Beautiful. And we will include all of these links down below in the show notes. So
Oh.
now to wrap up, what is either a book, a practice, or a tool that has changed your relationship to sexuality that you want to share with the listeners?
Okay, my favorite one: being grateful for the pleasure that you experience.
Ooh, this is a book?
No, no, no. This is a
Oh, this is a
practice.
practice. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, when I was in the process of healing my shame, a lot of what I was experiencing was like feelings of ickiness and like
Mhm.
grossness and like, oh man, why did I do that
Yep.
after masturbating or after having sex?
Yep.
Or, if I was experiencing pleasure and then it went away, it would be like, oh, what happened? What's wrong with me? Right. So just giving gratitude for my body for
Mhm.
experiencing the pleasure that I was experiencing was like such a game changer for me. So after masturbation, session, I would be like, thank you so much, body, for this like amazing orgasm you've just given me. Right. Thank you, clitoris, for working so tirelessly for me. Thank you, vulva, for giving me all of this pleasure. I'm so grateful for my body's ability to experience sexual desire and pleasure.
Beautiful.
So gratitude was a huge, huge practice that really supported me and could be really, really helpful in supporting others as well, I think.
Amazing. I
Mhm.
agree with that. I totally can relate with the icky feeling after, and I'm sure everybody listening can as well. What does being sexually empowered not mean? Like, what's a misconception people have?
Oh, I love this question. The biggest misconception that people have when it comes to sexual empowerment is that it needs to look a certain way.
Ooh.
That it's like lingerie and high heels and looking sultry and like lots of oral sex and blah, blah, blah. No, sexual empowerment is who you are, how you want to express yourself. If you are super fucking happy having sex once a year and you're like, that is my jam, I have sex once a year and that feels amazing for me, then that's sexual empowerment. If sexual empowerment for you is engaging in self pleasure twice a week and feeling amazing about it, then that's sexual empowerment. If sexual empowerment for you means wearing lingerie, amazing. If sexual empowerment for you means wearing baggy clothing, but you feel sexy as hell in it, that's sexual empowerment. So the biggest misconception is that it needs to look a certain way.
Mhm.
And sexual empowerment is not this cookie cutter idea. It's whoever you are and how you feel about your sex life. If you feel great about your sexual expression, that is all that matters. That's it. Doesn't have to look a certain way. What matters is how you feel about it.
Beautiful. What's one truth
Mhm.
you wish every woman could embody right now?
There's one truth that I wish every woman could embody right now. Hmm. That sex gets to be fun. That sex gets to be really, really fun. That you get to enjoy it and have fun with it. And it could be with a partner, but it can also be by yourself. You can have a lot of fun by yourself.
I agree
I
with
would say
that.
that.
100%.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Jocelyn, this has been such a good conversation. You have been an amazing
Yay!
guest. I know that this podcast is going to resonate with my audience. I can't wait to see you in person again and have more of these
I
conversations
know.
in real
Let
life.
me know when you're back. I know. Let me know when you're in Mexico and let's hang out. I would love to see you again.
Yeah, I'm thinking it'll probably be soon. So I will
Cool.
send dates your way. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody listening, if you took anything away from this podcast episode, take a screenshot, share it to your Instagram or wherever it is that you hang out. Make sure that you give Jocelyn a follow. Check out her website. Again, all the links are down below. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. Make sure to visit theericacruz.com. That's Erica with a K, where you can subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. You can help this podcast grow by supporting me with an Apple Podcast rate and review. If you took anything away from this episode, I invite you to take a screenshot and share it on social media so that your favorite badass Latinas can also check it out. Be sure to tag me at the Erica Cruz. That's Erica with a K, because you know I want to see it. If you're ready to join the revolution and be a part of the Courage Driven Latina community, visit couragedrivenlatina.com to get more information and join the waitlist. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.